Those braids need to come off right now. Mrs. Michelle Harper's voice sliced through the morning stillness of room 203 as she descended on Gabriella Kim's desk, her manicured fingers already reaching for the child's carefully woven hair. This ethnic styling is completely inappropriate for a learning environment, she continued, her tone dripping with false concern that barely masked her contempt. Gabriella's hands moved instinctively to protect her braids, but Harper was faster, gripping a thick section and yanking hard enough to make the 10-year-old's eyes water. "Students don't get to make their own rules here," the teacher sneered. The scissors appeared from Harper's blazer pocket, their metallic edges catching the fluorescent lights like a warning no one heeded. Snip. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. A braid fell onto Gabriella's open social studies textbook, the intricate pattern her appa had helped create now severed and lifeless. Gasps erupted from every corner of the classroom. "Now that's better," Harper said, stepping back to admire her work. Gabriella didn't scream. She didn't move. She simply stared forward, her jaw locked tight, her breathing controlled despite the burning sensation on her scalp. Years of loss had taught her something most 10-year-olds never learned. Never let them see you break. What Mrs. Harper couldn't see, what she'd never even thought to look for, was the phone number programmed into Gabriella's watch. The one that connected directly to a man whose love for his adopted daughter was matched only by his capacity for calculated vengeance. Before we continue with what happened next, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story will leave you speechless. The morning had started like any other Tuesday at Westfield Elementary School. Gabriella Kim had arrived early, her purple backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she walked through the front entrance. She'd chosen her seat in Mrs. Harper's class months ago, third row, second seat from the window. Close enough to hear everything clearly. Far enough to observe without being constantly called on. It was a strategic position she'd learned to value. Room 203 buzzed with the usual pre-class energy when she entered. Marcus Chun was showing off his new sneakers to a cluster of boys near the pencil sharpener. Sarah Johnson and her friends whispered about some weekend drama. The smell of cafeteria breakfast still lingered in the hallways. Everything felt normal, routine, safe. Mrs. Harper stood at her desk arranging papers with mechanical precision, her navy blazer perfectly pressed, her blonde hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her face. She taught 5th grade for 12 years and wore that experience like armor, never letting students forget who held the power in her classroom. "If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 10,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter." "Today we'll begin our unit on American symbols and what they represent," Harper announced as the bell rang, her voice commanding immediate silence. She picked up a dry erase marker and turned toward the whiteboard. But she never wrote anything. Her eyes had locked onto something else. Something that apparently offended her more than any student misbehavior ever could. Gabriella's hair. The braids had taken 3 hours the previous Sunday. Appa had sat patiently in their living room, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he sectioned and wove, following the video tutorial he'd found online. He'd wanted to learn, to connect with this part of his daughter's heritage even though it wasn't his own. Each braid carried his love and effort. "Miss Kim," Harper's voice dropped several degrees in temperature. The classroom fell silent instantly. Students knew that tone. It meant someone was about to get destroyed. "Your hairstyle violates our dress code policy regarding appropriate grooming standards." Gabriella's hand rose slowly to touch her braids, confusion flickering across her face before she caught herself. She'd worn variations of this style for 2 years without any teacher commenting. "Mrs. Harper, I don't understand," she said quietly, keeping her voice respectful the way Appa had taught her. "My hair is clean and neat. It doesn't distract anyone." "It's a distraction to me," Harper shot back, her pale cheeks flushing slightly. "And it sets a precedent I won't allow in my classroom. You need to go to the office immediately and have someone help you fix this situation." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications that made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. Jamal Washington in the back row reached slowly for his phone, sliding it under his desk. He'd seen this coming for weeks, the way Harper's eyes lingered on certain students, the way her voice changed when addressing kids who didn't look like her. Gabriella remained seated, her heart pounding but her exterior calm. "With respect, Mrs. Harper, I'd like to stay for class. There's nothing in the school handbook about braids. My dad checked before the school year started." The mention of her father seemed to ignite something in Harper. She strode to her desk, yanked open the top drawer with enough force to make it bounce, and pulled out a pair of scissors that she'd apparently been keeping ready. "This defiance ends now," she announced. "If you won't comply with basic standards of decency, I'll help you understand what's expected." Several students gasped. Maya Rodriguez whispered urgently, "Mrs. Harper, maybe we should just—" "Silence," Harper snapped without even looking at the girl. She moved toward Gabriella's desk with purpose, scissors raised like a weapon. Marcus stood halfway up from his seat. "Mrs. Harper, you can't," he started. But the teacher was already there, already gripping Gabriella's hair, already positioning the scissors. "This is what happens when students think rules don't apply to them," she said. The scissors closed. The braids separated. The severed hair landed on Gabriella's textbook like evidence at a crime scene. More phones emerged now, no longer hidden. The recording had begun. Harper cut a second braid. Then a third. Each snip echoed in the frozen classroom, a sound that would replay in nightmares for weeks. Sarah Martinez had both hands pressed against her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. David Chun was recording from 3 different angles, his phone held steady despite his shaking hands. Gabriella could smell the coconut oil she'd used that morning, still fragrant in the hair now scattered across her desk. Her scalp throbbed where Harper had gripped too tightly, pulled too hard. But she didn't cry. Crying was what Harper wanted, what teachers like Harper always wanted when they decided to put you in your place. Instead, Gabriella looked directly into Harper's eyes and held that gaze without flinching, without blinking, without giving her the satisfaction of fear. The teacher's triumphant smile wavered slightly under that unwavering stare. "Perhaps now you'll learn to present yourself appropriately," Harper said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. She stepped back, still holding the scissors, her breathing slightly elevated. The classroom was a tableau of shock. No one moved. No one spoke. The clock above the door ticked steadily, marking each second of this moment that would change everything. Then running footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door burst open. Ms. Chun, the school counselor, stood in the doorway, her phone in her hand, her face a mixture of alarm and disbelief. "I got multiple calls from students," she said breathlessly. "What's happening in here?" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes taking in the scene. Mrs. Harper with scissors still in hand. Gabriella sitting impossibly still, her mutilated hair creating a halo of evidence around her desk. The sea of student phones pointed their way like accusations. And in the terrible silence that followed, in the moment before the adult explanations and justifications and consequences began, Gabriella's watch vibrated softly against her wrist. A single word appeared on the screen, sent from the number she'd texted 30 seconds earlier. Coming. Her APA was coming. And Mrs. Michelle Harper's carefully constructed world was about to learn what happened when you hurt someone loved by a man who protected his family with the full weight of an empire most people didn't even know existed. To understand what happened next, you need to know who Gabriella Kim really was. Not just the quiet girl in the second row. Not just another student in Michelle Harper's classroom. 3 years ago, Gabriella had a different last name. She was 7 years old, sitting in the back seat of her parents' Honda Civic on a rainy Tuesday evening. They were driving home from her dance recital. She performed a solo, her first ever, and her parents couldn't stop smiling. Her mother kept turning around, saying how proud she was. Her father had the radio playing softly, some old R&B song her mom loved. Then the truck ran the red light. Gabriella remembered the screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal, the way the world spun and her mother's scream cut off mid-sound. Then nothing. Just the smell of gasoline and the distant sound of sirens. Her parents died on impact. The doctors told her later, much later, when she was in a foster home with blank walls and other kids who'd lost everything too. She didn't cry then either. Something inside her had gone quiet, like a light switching off. The foster system shuffled her around. 3 homes in 8 months. Nobody wanted the sad, quiet girl who didn't talk much and flinched at loud noises. She learned quickly how to disappear, how to take up less space, how to need nothing from anyone. Then one day, a man came to the foster home. He wasn't there for her. That much was clear. He was there on business, the kind of business that made the social workers nervous and the director's hand shake when she signed papers. But Gabriella saw him in the hallway, and something about the way he carried himself, calm and certain, made her stare. He noticed. Most adults looked through her like she was glass. But this man stopped. He had dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that seemed to calculate everything in a single glance. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and moved like someone who expected the world to make room. "You're the one they call the quiet girl?" He asked in English marked by a slight Korean accent. Gabriella nodded. "Why are you quiet?" She considered the question. "Because nobody listens anyway." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Smart," he said. "What's your name?" "Gabriella Robinson." "How old are you, Gabriella Robinson?" 7. He studied her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He crouched down to her level, which nobody ever did. "Do you want to stay here?" "No." "Where do you want to be?" "Somewhere that doesn't feel like waiting to disappear." He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked to the director's office. Gabriella heard raised voices, then silence, then the sound of papers being shuffled. 2 hours later, she was in the back of a black sedan, her few belongings in a plastic bag, driving toward a life she couldn't have imagined. Chun Kim didn't explain much at first. He took her to a penthouse apartment that overlooked the entire city, with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked expensive enough to buy her old foster home twice over. He showed her to a room, already prepared, with a bed bigger than any she'd slept in and a closet full of new clothes. "This is your home now," he said simply. "You're safe here." "Why did you take me?" she asked, because she'd learned that adults always wanted something. "Because you remind me of myself," he said. "And because everyone deserves a family that fights for them." It took weeks before she understood what Chun Kim actually did. The men in suits who came and went. The phone calls in Korean that stopped when she entered the room. The way people looked at him with fear dressed up as respect. But by then, she'd already started calling him Appa, and he'd already promised her something nobody else ever had. "Nobody will hurt you again. Not while I'm alive." Now, standing in the school hallway with her butchered hair, Gabriella understood what that promise actually meant. Her Appa wasn't just coming to pick her up. He was coming to make sure Michelle Harper understood the mistake she'd made. And Chun Kim never made empty threats. If you're loving this story, hit that subscribe button now because what happens in the next chapter will leave you speechless. Don't miss it. Chun Kim stood at the window of his office on the 42nd floor, phone still in his hand, watching the city sprawl below him. His reflection in the glass showed nothing. No anger. No emotion. Just the same calm expression he wore when negotiating deals or ending problems. But inside, something had shifted. Something cold and absolute. The door opened without knocking. Only 3 men in his organization had that privilege. Gene walked in first, his movements precise and economical. At 35, he was Chun's oldest lieutenant, covered in tattoos that told stories he never spoke about. Behind him came Tae, younger and leaner, a technology specialist who could make entire digital footprints disappear. Last was Min, the quiet one, whose unassuming appearance hid a mind that solved problems with surgical efficiency. They knew better than to speak first. They waited. "My daughter called from school," Chun said, still looking at the city. A teacher cut her hair. In front of her classmates. As punishment. The three men exchanged glances. They'd met Gabriella dozens of times, watched Chun transform from the cold strategist they knew into something resembling an actual father. They understood what this meant. Jean stepped forward. "What do you need?" "Everything. The teacher's name is Michelle Harper. I want her entire life on my desk by tonight. Employment history, financial records, social media, parking tickets, everything. I want to know who she is, where she goes, who she loves. I want to know what she fears." Tay pulled out his phone, fingers already moving. On it. "The school," Chun continued, turning from the window. "Riverside Elementary. I want to know their policies, their administration, their funding sources. I want to know who covers for teachers like this and how long it's been happening." Min nodded. "We'll need to get inside. Then get inside. Pose as parents, maintenance workers, whatever it takes. Be invisible, but be thorough." Chun walked to his desk, a massive piece of dark wood that had cost more than most people's cars. On it sat a single framed photo. Gabriella, smiling, her braids perfect and new, taken just 2 months ago. He picked it up, studied it. Here's what people don't understand about power. Real power isn't about violence. It's about information and timing. It's about knowing exactly how to break someone without ever raising your voice. He set the photo down carefully. "This teacher thought she could humiliate my daughter because she believed there would be no consequences. She thought Gabriella was just another child with no protection, no voice, no one who would fight back. She was wrong. And by the time we're finished, she'll understand exactly how wrong she was." "Do we have parameters?" Jean asked. He knew Chun well enough to know that this question mattered. Chun considered. "I want her destroyed, but not martyred. She needs to lose everything slowly enough to understand why it's happening. Her job, her reputation, her sense of safety. I want her to feel what my daughter felt. Powerless. Watched. Violated. What about the school? They're complicit. If they try to cover this up, they burn too. And if they try to make this right, then we'll see how sincere they are. But I doubt it." Tay looked up from his phone. "I've already found her Facebook. Posted yesterday about disruptive students with no discipline at home." 3 guesses which student she was talking about. Chun's expression didn't change, but his hands curled slightly on the desk. "Screenshot everything. I want a full social media audit going back 5 years. Min spoke for the first time, his voice quiet. "Your daughter. Is she safe at school right now?" The question made Chun pause. It was the right question, the human question underneath all the strategy. "I'm going to get her now. She'll stay home until this is resolved. You want us to start tonight? Start now. And Min, make sure our friends in the police department understand that any reports filed by this teacher should experience unfortunate delays. Nothing permanent. Just slow enough to make her nervous." The 3 men moved toward the door, but Chun's voice stopped them. "One more thing. Find out if this teacher has done this before. If there are other victims. Other families who were too afraid or too poor to fight back. Because if there are, we're going to make sure they get justice too." Jean smiled slightly. The kind of smile that made people nervous. "On it, boss." They left. Chun stood alone in his office, looking at Gabriella's photo. People often asked him, in the rare moments when they felt brave enough, why he'd adopted her. A black child. An orphan. Someone with no connection to his world or his culture. He never explained. Never felt the need to. But the truth was simple. He'd grown up in Seoul with nothing. His own father had been violent, his mother absent. He'd built his empire from street corners and desperation, learning early that the world didn't protect the vulnerable. It consumed them. When he saw Gabriella in that foster home, saw the same careful emptiness in her eyes that he'd once carried, he recognized her. She wasn't a charity case. She was a survivor who deserved a family that would burn the world down before letting her be hurt again. And now someone had hurt her. Chun picked up his phone, dialed his driver. "Bring the car around." We're going to Riverside Elementary. As he walked out of his office, he passed a mirror in the hallway. For just a moment, he saw what others saw. A businessman in an expensive suit. Someone who owned restaurants and invested in real estate. Someone respectable. But underneath that reflection was the truth that Michelle Harper would soon discover. He was a man who'd climbed out of poverty by learning how to make problems disappear. And she'd just become his biggest problem. The elevator descended. 42 floors. Enough time to plan exactly how this would unfold. Enough time to remember that mercy was a luxury he rarely afforded his enemies. But for Gabriella, he'd try. He'd give them one chance to make this right. Just one. Gene sat in a rented Honda Civic 2 blocks from Riverside Elementary, laptop balanced on his knees, watching the school's front entrance through tinted windows. He'd been in position for 3 hours, documenting everyone who entered or left. Teachers, parents, staff. Building a map of the school's ecosystem. His phone buzzed. Tay. I'm in their system. Tay's voice came through his earpiece. Security footage, email servers, personnel files. Everything. How bad is it? Worse than we thought. Michelle Harper has had 12 formal complaints filed against her in 3 years. All from families of color. All dismissed by administration as misunderstandings or cultural differences. Jin's jaw tightened. Forward me everything. Names, dates, details. Already in your inbox. But Jean, there's more. She's not just racist. She's calculating about it. She targets kids whose families don't have resources to fight back. Immigrant families. Single parents. Foster kids. She knows exactly who she can abuse without consequences. What about today? Checking now. He heard keyboard clicks. She deleted 3 emails right after the incident. But nothing's ever really deleted. Give me a minute. Jean watched a woman exit the school, checking her phone, oblivious to being observed. This was the part of his work he'd grown to appreciate. Not the violence, though he could handle that when necessary. But this. The careful documentation. The building of a case so airtight that the target couldn't even argue their innocence. Got it, Tay said. She emailed the principal immediately after sending Gabriella out. Subject line says, problem student resolved. Body of the email says, and I quote, handled the Robinson situation per our previous discussion. She won't be an issue anymore. Robinson? She doesn't even know Gabriella's real last name. And check this. There was a previous discussion. 2 weeks ago, Harper emailed Principal Davis complaining about ethnic hairstyles becoming a distraction. Davis replied that she should handle it at her discretion. So the principal authorized this. Authorized or enabled. Either way, he's complicit. Gene pulled out his phone, texted Min. What's your status? The reply came quickly. Inside. Posed as new custodian. Harper's classroom is empty right now. Retrieving physical evidence. Gene smiled slightly. Min had a gift for invisibility. At 40, he looked like every middle-aged maintenance worker you'd ever ignored. Perfect for this kind of infiltration. Another text from Min came through. This time with a photo. Gabriella's cut braids, still lying on Harper's desk, partially hidden under papers. She kept them, Gene muttered. Like a trophy. His phone rang. Chun. Report, the boss said simply. Gene summarized everything in 90 seconds. The complaints. The emails. The evidence. The principal's involvement. When he finished, there was silence on the other end. The kind of silence that made people nervous. Finally, Chun spoke. Find the other families. The ones she targeted. I want to talk to them. That might be difficult. Some have probably moved. Others won't want to revisit the trauma. Then make it worth their time. Offer them something they need. Legal support. Financial assistance. Whatever it takes. If we're going to destroy her, we do it properly. With a pattern. With proof that this wasn't one mistake, but a career of abuse. Understood. What about our approach? We go public. But not yet. First, we document everything. Then we give the school one chance to make this right. If they refuse, we bury them all. Jean considered this. It was more restrained than he'd expected. Usually, when someone went after Chun's family, the response was swift and brutal. This felt different. More strategic. You're giving them a chance? I'm giving them rope, Chun corrected. People reveal themselves when they think they can escape consequences. Let's see how they respond when they realize they can't. Jean understood. It was a trap. A careful, methodical trap. One more thing, Chun added. I want surveillance on Harper. Her house, her car, everywhere she goes. I want her to feel watched. But keep it legal. No threats, no contact. Just presence. You want her paranoid. I want her understanding that her actions have consequences. That she's not invisible anymore. Jean made a note. We can do that. Anything else? Yes. Find out if she has family. Children. I want to know who matters to her. This gave Jean pause. Boss, are we targeting her family? No. Chun's voice was firm. We're understanding her. If she has children, she'll understand the violation more deeply. If she doesn't, we'll find what she does value. Everyone has something they can't afford to lose. Jean nodded to himself. It was why Chun had survived 20 years in this business. He didn't just destroy enemies. He understood them first. Knew exactly how to apply pressure where it would hurt most. I'll have a full report by tonight, Jean said. Good. And Jean, keep this quiet. No word gets out about who we are or what we're doing. As far as anyone knows, we're just concerned citizens gathering information. The call ended. Jean sat in his car, watching the school, thinking about Michelle Harper. She'd woken up this morning thinking she was untouchable. A teacher with tenure, union protection, administrative support. Someone who could hurt a child and face no consequences. By tonight, she'd start to realize her mistake. And by the end of the week, she'd understand that some children had families who didn't forgive. Who didn't forget. Who had the resources and the will to make sure justice was served, even if they had to serve it themselves. Jin's phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Tay with an attached file. Harper's home address, phone records, credit report, and complete social media history. Also found her sister's information. Elementary school teacher too. Different district. Jean downloaded the files, began reading. And with each page, he understood why Chun had been so calm. Michelle Harper hadn't just made one mistake. She'd built a career on making them. And now, finally, someone was going to hold her accountable. The question wasn't whether she'd lose everything. The question was how much she'd understand before it all fell apart. Michelle Harper pulled into her driveway at 4:47 p.m., exhausted and irritated. The day had been chaos after that Robinson girl's dramatic exit. The principal had called her in, asked questions about the incident, seemed concerned about optics. But ultimately, he'd supported her. Reminded her that teachers needed discretion in maintaining classroom standards. She grabbed her bag from the passenger seat, stepped out of her car, locked it. The November air was crisp, leaves scattered across her lawn. She made a mental note to ask her husband to rake them this weekend. That's when she noticed the box. Small, brown cardboard, sitting on her front porch. No address label. No delivery notice. Just a box, centered perfectly on her welcome mat. Michelle frowned. She hadn't ordered anything. She climbed the porch steps, picked it up. Light. Something shifted inside. She unlocked her front door, stepped inside, set her bag down. Her cat, Whiskers, wound around her ankles, meowing for dinner. In a minute, Michelle muttered, taking the box to the kitchen table. She opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, were 3 braids. Black, thick, with small gold beads at the ends. The ones she'd cut from Gabriella Robinson that morning. But that wasn't what made Michelle's hands start shaking. Around the braids, wrapped carefully like a ribbon, was a lock of blonde hair. Her shade exactly. The length matched her own hair. No note. No explanation. Just the braids and the message they represented. We know where you live. We know what you did. We can reach you any time. Michelle dropped the box, stumbled backward. Her breath came short and fast. This was insane. This was illegal. Who would do this? The Robinson girls' family. Had to be. She grabbed her phone, hands trembling, dialed the principal's cell. He answered on the 3rd ring. Michelle, what is it? Someone left something at my house. A threat. The hair I cut today, and she swallowed hard, and some of my own hair. Someone's been here. Silence. Then, are you sure? Am I sure? Of course I'm sure. Someone broke into my house or cut my hair, or she stopped, realizing how paranoid she sounded. Did you call the police? Not yet. I'm calling you first. She heard him sigh. Michelle, look. Today was complicated. That girl's family is upset. But sending threatening packages, that's serious. Call the police, file a report. Document everything. You'll back me up? If they ask questions about what happened? Another pause. Longer this time. Of course. You were enforcing school policy. But Michelle, maybe take a few days off. Let this cool down. Take days off? Are you kidding? I have a classroom. And I have a school to protect. If this escalates, if her family lawyers up or goes to the media, I need some distance. You understand. Michelle's stomach dropped. He was abandoning her. Already. After one phone call. Fine, she said coldly. I'll handle it myself. She hung up, stared at the box on her table. The braids seemed to stare back, accusing. Michelle made herself move. She took photos of everything. The box, the contents, the tissue paper. Evidence. Then she called the police non-emergency line, filed a report. They said an officer would come by tomorrow to take a statement. Tomorrow. Not tonight. Not immediately. She was on her own. That night, Michelle barely slept. Every sound made her jump. The house settling. The cat knocking something over. The neighbor's dog barking. She kept checking the windows, making sure the doors were locked, looking for shadows that didn't belong. Her husband, Greg, tried to calm her down. You're overreacting, he said. It's probably just angry parents trying to scare you. They won't actually do anything. But the next morning, when Michelle walked outside, all 4 of her car tires were slashed. Greg stood beside her, staring. Okay, he admitted. Maybe I was wrong. The police came this time. 2 officers, bored and professional, took photos, filled out paperwork. Asked if she had any enemies. Just the family of a student I disciplined yesterday, Michelle explained. The officers exchanged looks. What kind of discipline? She hesitated. I had to correct her appearance. Her hair was distracting other students. You cut a student's hair? It was within my authority as her teacher. The older officer closed his notebook. Ma'am, you might want to get a lawyer. They left. Didn't dust for prints. Didn't canvass the neighborhood. Just took their report and drove away. Michelle went inside, called her union rep. Got voicemail. Left a message that sounded too desperate, too scared. By noon, she'd received 5 silent phone calls. Someone dialing her cell, letting it ring twice, hanging up. Each time, she answered. Each time, silence. She blocked the number. They called from a different one. If you're as hooked on this story as we are, make sure you're subscribed. You need to see how far this goes. Hit that button right now. That evening, Michelle's sister called. Lisa, also a teacher, voice tight with worry. Michelle, what did you do? What do you mean? Someone emailed the school board. With your employment file. Every complaint ever filed against you. Every incident. Everything. How is that possible? Those files are confidential. I don't know, but they're not anymore. Michelle, some of these complaints, I didn't know about them. The Iranian boy whose name you kept mispronouncing on purpose? The girl you failed for wearing a hijab? What were you thinking? Michelle's face burned. Those were misunderstandings. Cultural differences. They look like a pattern, Michelle. A really ugly pattern. I'm not racist, Michelle snapped. I just have standards. Her sister was quiet for a moment. Then you need help. Real help. Because whoever's doing this, they're not playing around. That night, Michelle sat in her living room, curtains drawn, lights off, watching her front door. Greg had gone to bed, exhausted by her paranoia. But Michelle couldn't sleep. Couldn't relax. Because at 11:47 p.m., she saw them. 3 men. Standing across the street from her house. Dark suits. Perfectly still. Just watching. She grabbed her phone, dialed 911. Sent Greg running downstairs. By the time he looked out the window, the men were gone. The police came again. Found nothing. No footprints. No evidence. Just Michelle's increasingly frantic insistence that someone was stalking her. The officer suggested she might want to talk to someone. A therapist, maybe. Stress did strange things to people. They left her standing in her driveway, wrapped in a bathrobe, watching shadows that might or might not be real. And in a car 2 blocks away, Jean watched her through binoculars and smiled. Phase 1 complete. Michelle Harper was starting to understand what it felt like to be powerless. Principal Robert Davis sat in his office at 6:30 a.m., nursing his 3rd cup of coffee, staring at his computer screen like it might explode. In a way, it already had. His email inbox had 347 unread messages. Most from the same source. Anonymous sender. Subject line simply read Riverside Elementary investigation. Each email contained a different piece of evidence. Student complaints that had been filed and dismissed. Internal memos discussing problem teachers. Video footage from classroom security cameras showing Michelle Harper making inappropriate comments to students of color. Audio recordings of staff meetings where he'd explicitly told teachers to handle difficult families quietly. Everything he'd buried. Everything he'd swept under bureaucratic carpets. All of it, compiled, organized, time-stamped, and sent to every member of the school board, every PTA parent, and 3 local news stations. His career was over. He knew it before he finished reading the first 10 emails. His secretary knocked, poked her head in. Mr. Davis, there are reporters outside. 5 news vans. They're asking about Michelle Harper and discrimination complaints. He closed his eyes. Tell them I'm not available. They said they'll wait. Of course they would. His phone rang. The superintendent. He considered not answering, but that would only delay the inevitable. Robert, the superintendent's voice was cold. My office. Now. The meeting lasted 45 minutes. It felt like 45 hours. The superintendent had printed every email, spread them across her conference table like a prosecutor laying out evidence. The school board's attorney sat in the corner, taking notes, his expression grim. How long has this been going on? The superintendent asked. Davis tried to explain. Context. Budget constraints. Difficult parents. The challenges of managing a diverse student population with limited resources. She cut him off. How long has Michelle Harper been abusing students? He hesitated. That's not, I wouldn't characterize it as abuse. Then how would you characterize telling a black student her natural hair is unsanitary? How would you characterize allowing a teacher to physically alter a child's appearance without parental consent? What word would you use, Robert? He had no answer. You're on administrative leave, effective immediately. The board will meet tonight to discuss termination. The attorney will be in touch about liability issues. And Robert, she leaned forward, if you're thinking about fighting this, don't. We have enough documentation here to end your career permanently. Take the severance and disappear quietly. He left the building through the back entrance, avoiding reporters. Got in his car. Sat in the parking lot, hands shaking on the steering wheel. 23 years in education. 2 decades of service. Gone in one morning because he'd looked the other way too many times. Inside the school, the chaos was spreading. Parents were pulling students out of classes, demanding meetings, threatening lawsuits. The PTA president had called an emergency session. Teachers whispered in hallways, trying to figure out what this meant for them. And in Michelle Harper's classroom, a substitute teacher faced 30 students who knew exactly what had happened and wanted to talk about nothing else. Did you see the news? One girl asked. My mom says Mrs. Harper's going to jail, a boy added. The substitute tried to redirect them to math. It didn't work. By lunchtime, the story had broken locally. Channel 7 ran it first, then Channel 4, then Channel 9. Teacher accused of cutting student's hair in discriminatory act. Riverside Elementary under investigation for pattern of racial bias. The footage was damning. Not just of the incident with Gabriella, though that was bad enough, but clips from other incidents. Other students. Other families who'd been silenced or ignored. All of it, compiled into a 6-minute segment that made the school look like a systematic failure. Michelle's face was everywhere. Her photo from the school website. Screenshots of her social media posts where she'd complained about difficult parents and entitled students. Every post seemed worse in hindsight, every comment revealing prejudices she'd thought were subtle. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters. Former students. Anonymous callers saying things that made her hands shake. Greg finally took her phone away. You need to stop, he said. Stop reading comments. Stop watching the news. Get a lawyer and let them handle it. But how could she stop? Her entire life was being dissected in real time. People she'd never met were calling her a monster, a racist, a criminal. Her Facebook page had been flooded with 1-star reviews as if she were a restaurant. Someone had created a petition demanding she lose her teaching license. It had 15,000 signatures in 6 hours. The union rep finally called back. His voice was careful, detached. Michelle, I've reviewed your case. Given the evidence and the public attention, the union's position is that we can provide legal counsel, but we cannot endorse or defend your actions. What does that mean? It means you're on your own. I'm sorry. He hung up. No real apology. No support. Just abandonment. That afternoon, Michelle received a certified letter from the school district. Immediate suspension without pay, pending investigation. Termination hearing scheduled in 2 weeks. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the letter, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. 48 hours ago, she'd been a teacher with tenure and authority. Now she was unemployed, unemployable, and facing potential criminal charges. Greg sat across from her, quiet. Finally, he spoke. Michelle, did you really do all the things they're saying? She looked up. What? The other students. The other incidents. Did you really target kids because of their race? She started, then stopped. How could she explain? How could she make him understand that she'd never thought of it that way? She'd just been maintaining standards, expecting excellence, refusing to lower the bar. Except she had lowered the bar. Just never for the white students. The realization hit her like cold water. She had done exactly what they were accusing her of. Not consciously, maybe. Not deliberately. But she judged some students more harshly, expected less from some families, assumed incompetence based on accents and appearances. And now, finally, someone was holding her accountable. Hit subscribe if you're still watching. This story is about to take a turn you won't see coming. That night, Michelle stood at her window, watching the street. The reporters had finally left. The phone had stopped ringing. The house was quiet except for the sound of her own breathing. She thought about Gabriella Robinson. The way she'd sat so still while Michelle cut her hair. The way she'd looked up afterward, eyes dry, face calm. Like she'd expected this. Like she'd been preparing for it her whole life. What kind of world had that child grown up in, Michelle wondered, where a teacher's cruelty was just another thing to endure? And what kind of person was Michelle, that she'd become part of that world? She didn't have answers. Just the growing understanding that she'd caused real harm to real children, and now finally, the consequences had found her. Outside, in a car she couldn't see, Tay uploaded the final batch of files to the cloud. School board emails. Personnel records. Everything that proved Riverside Elementary's discrimination wasn't one teacher's mistake, but an institutional failure. Tomorrow, that evidence would reach the state education department. And by the end of the week, federal investigators would get involved. Michelle Harper was just the beginning. The entire school was about to be held accountable for years of looking the other way. Justice, Tay had learned working for Chun, wasn't always loud or violent. Sometimes it was quiet and methodical. Sometimes it was just making sure the truth couldn't be ignored anymore. He started the car, pulled away from the curb, left Michelle Harper to her sleepless night. Phase 2 was complete. Michelle stayed late at home for 3 days straight, afraid to leave, afraid to be seen. But on Thursday, she received a call from her lawyer, a nervous man named Patterson who'd been recommended by a friend of a friend. "You need to go to the school," he said. "Collect your personal items from the classroom. They're boxing everything up, sending it to storage. If you want your things, get them now. Can't someone else do that? Do you trust someone else with your personal belongings? Your files? Your grade books?" She didn't. So at 7 p.m., when the building would be mostly empty, Michelle drove to Riverside Elementary. Used her key card to enter through the side door. The hallways were dark except for emergency lighting. Her footsteps echoed on linoleum floors. She'd walked these halls for 8 years. Known every classroom, every supply closet, every squeaky floorboard. Now it felt foreign, hostile, like the building itself had turned against her. Her classroom was at the end of the hall. Door closed but not locked. She pushed it open, reached for the light switch. The lights were already on. 3 men stood in her classroom. Dark suits. Perfectly still. One leaned against her desk. The other 2 flanked the door she just walked through. Michelle's heart stopped. She recognized them. The men from across the street. The ones who'd been watching her house. She started to back out, but the 2 by the door moved smoothly, blocking her exit. Not threatening. Not touching her. Just standing in the way. "Mrs. Harper." The man at her desk spoke, his voice accented, calm. "Please, come in. We've been waiting to talk to you." "I'm calling the police," Michelle said, reaching for her phone. "Go ahead," the man said. "But before you do, you might want to hear what we have to say." "Who are you?" "My name is Jean. These are my colleagues, Tay and Min. We work for someone you've wronged." "The Robinson girl," Michelle whispered. "Her name is Gabriella Kim," Jean corrected, "and you didn't just wrong her. You assaulted her. Humiliated her. Violated her. I was enforcing school policy." Jean smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "No, you were enforcing your prejudices. And you picked the wrong child to do it to." He slid something across her desk. A folder. Michelle stepped closer despite herself, looked down. Inside were photos. Gabriella as a toddler. With different parents. A black couple, smiling. Then photos of a car crash. Twisted metal. Emergency vehicles. Then photos of a little girl in a foster home, sitting alone. Then photos of a man. Asian. Severe. Standing beside that same girl, now smiling again. Do you know who that is? Jean asked. No. That's Chun Kim. Gabriella's adoptive father. Also, Jin's voice went quieter, somehow more dangerous, one of the most powerful men in the city. Michelle's legs felt weak. I don't understand. 3 years ago, Mr. Kim found Gabriella in a foster home. Her parents had died in that crash. She had no one. He adopted her, gave her a family, gave her protection. And 2 days ago, you cut her hair like she was nothing. It was just hair, Michelle said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Just hair, Jean repeated. He gestured to Tay, who pulled up a video on his phone, turned it toward Michelle. It was footage from her classroom. The incident. But the angle was different from the student videos. This came from the security camera she'd thought was broken. She watched herself cut Gabriella's braids. Heard her own voice saying things she didn't remember saying. Saw the triumph on her face when she stepped back to admire her work. For a black girl, Jean said, hair is cultural identity. It's history. It's resistance. And you cut it like it meant nothing because you thought she meant nothing. Because you thought no one would protect her. I didn't know, Michelle started. You didn't care to know, Min spoke for the first time. That's worse. Jean opened another folder. Inside were pages and pages. Complaints. Emails. Documentation of every discriminatory thing Michelle had done in 8 years. We found 12 families you targeted, he said. 12 children whose parents tried to report you and were ignored. Some of those families have moved away. Some gave up fighting. But all of them remember. All of them carry the damage you caused. Make sure you're subscribed because what happens next will shock you. Don't miss the next chapter. Michelle felt tears starting. I made mistakes. I see that now. But this, she gestured at the men, at the folders, this is illegal. You're stalking me, threatening me. We haven't threatened you once, Jean said calmly. We've simply documented the truth and made sure it couldn't be hidden anymore. Everything that's happened to you has been your own actions coming to light. My tires. The package. The men watching my house. Jin's expression didn't change. I don't know anything about tires, Mrs. Harper. As for the rest, we were gathering information. Legal surveillance. We haven't broken any laws. What do you want from me? Michelle's voice cracked. Jean stood, walked around the desk until he was 3 feet from her. We want you to understand. Not just intellectually, but deeply. We want you to feel what those 12 children felt. Powerless. Targeted. Afraid. I do understand. I'm sorry. I'll apologize to everyone. I'll resign. I'll leave teaching forever. You'll do all of that anyway, Jean said. Your teaching license will be revoked. Your lawsuit settlements will take everything you have. Your reputation is destroyed. That's already done. Then what? Jean studied her. Mr. Kim wanted me to tell you something. He's a father who loves his daughter more than anything in this world. And when someone hurts her, his first instinct is to make sure they never hurt anyone again. Do you understand what I'm saying? Michelle did. She understood perfectly. But, Jean continued, Gabriella asked him to show mercy. She said you weren't worth his time or his resources. She said destroying you wouldn't heal what you'd broken. Michelle felt something crack inside her chest. Relief mixed with shame. So here's what's going to happen, Jean said. You're going to lose your career. Your reputation. Your sense of safety. You're going to spend months, maybe years, looking over your shoulder, wondering if we're still watching. And every time you see a little black girl with braids, you're going to remember what you did. That's your punishment. He walked to the door, paused. But if you ever, and I mean ever, go near another child with the intention to harm them, we'll be back. And next time, Mr. Kim won't listen to his daughter's mercy. Do you understand? Michelle nodded, tears streaming down her face now. The three men left. Just walked out of her classroom like they'd never been there. Michelle collapsed into her desk chair, surrounded by boxes of her belongings, crying for the first time since this started. Not because she'd been caught. Not because she'd lost her job. But because she finally understood, truly understood, the damage she'd done. Michelle thought it was over. The men had delivered their message. She'd lost everything already. What more could they take? But the next morning, she received a text from an unknown number. 1247, Industrial Boulevard. Warehouse 6. Come alone. 8 p.m. tonight. This is the only invitation you'll receive. She showed Greg. He said not to go. Said it was obviously a trap. Said to call the police. But Michelle knew the police wouldn't help. They'd been useless this entire time. Reports filed and ignored. Evidence that mysteriously disappeared. She suspected now that Kim's influence reached further than she'd imagined. And something inside her needed to see this through. Needed to face whatever was waiting. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe she just wanted it to be finished. At 7:45 p.m., she drove to the industrial district. Found the warehouse. A massive concrete building that looked abandoned, surrounded by empty lots and chain-link fence. She parked, sat in her car for 5 minutes, gathering courage. Then stepped out into the cold November night. The warehouse door was unlocked. She pushed it open, stepped inside. The space was mostly empty. Concrete floors. High ceilings. Exposed beams. A few old crates stacked in corners. And in the center, under a single hanging light, stood a man. He was in his 40s, Korean, wearing an expensive suit that seemed out of place in this desolate setting. His expression was calm, unreadable. Behind him, the three men from her classroom stood silent as shadows. "Mrs. Harper," the man said. "I'm Chun Kim." Michelle's throat went dry. She forced herself to walk forward, to not run. Chun studied her like she was a problem he was solving. "Do you know why you're here?" "To be threatened," she managed. "To be scared." "No," Chun said. "You're already scared. You're here to understand." He gestured to a chair that had been placed in the light. "Sit." Michelle sat. Her legs barely held her anyway. 3 years ago, Chun began, I found my daughter in a foster home. She was 7 years old. Both parents dead. No family. No protection. The system had failed her completely. She'd learned not to trust adults, not to expect kindness, not to believe anyone would fight for her. He paused, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. It took months to reach her. Months of patience and consistency before she'd even look at me directly. More months before she'd call me Appa. A full year before she believed I wouldn't abandon her. Michelle listened, unable to look away. And then you, Chun's voice went cold again, in 30 seconds, reminded her of every adult who'd failed her. Every person who'd used their power to hurt instead of protect. You made her feel small and powerless in front of her peers. You violated her autonomy and her dignity. I didn't know her story, Michelle whispered. Exactly, Chun said. You didn't know. Didn't care to know. You saw a black child with braids and made assumptions. Applied your prejudices. acted on your biases. He walked closer, standing over her now. Do you have children, Mrs. Harper? No. Then you can't fully understand what it's like to watch your child hurt and know you can't undo it. You can punish the person responsible. You can make sure it never happens again. But you can't undo the hurt. I'm sorry, Michelle said, and meant it. I'm so sorry. Footsteps echoed from the warehouse entrance. Michelle turned. Gabriella walked in, flanked by a woman Michelle didn't recognize. The girl wore a silk scarf covering her head, hiding the damage Michelle had done. She looked smaller here than she had in the classroom. More vulnerable. But her eyes were steady, clear. Appa, Gabriella said quietly. Stop. Chun's expression changed immediately. The cold calculation melted into concern. Gabriella, you didn't need to come. Yes, I did, the girl said. She walked to her father, took his hand. Because this isn't about you protecting me anymore. It's about me deciding what happens next. She turned to Michelle. And what happened next was something Michelle would remember forever. This 10-year-old girl, who had every right to be angry, to demand punishment, to want revenge, looked at her teacher with something that resembled pity. You hurt me, Gabriella said simply. Not just my hair. You made me feel like I was wrong for being who I am. Like my hair, my family, my existence was a problem you needed to fix. Michelle wanted to apologize again, but Gabriella held up a hand. But I've been hurt before, the girl continued. Worse than this. And I learned that carrying hate only hurts the person carrying it. So I'm not going to hate you, Mrs. Harper. I'm just going to make sure you never do this to anyone else. She looked up at her father. That's enough, Appa. She's lost everything already. Making her more scared won't fix what's broken. Chun looked at his daughter with an expression that was pure love and pride. You're sure? I'm sure. He nodded slowly, then turned back to Michelle. One more thing before you go. He pulled something from his pocket. A small box. Opened it. Inside was a simple bracelet. Silver, with small charms. Each charm represented something. A book. A house. A family. This belonged to Gabriella's mother, Chun said. Her biological mother. It was one of the few things that survived the crash. Gabriella wears it on special occasions to remember where she came from. He closed the box. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that the child you hurt carries more loss and more strength than you'll ever comprehend. She survived things that would break most adults. And still, she chooses mercy. Subscribers, you need to see how this ends. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, do it now. You're almost at the finale. Michelle looked at Gabriella, really looked at her, and saw what she'd been too blind to see before. Not a problem student. Not a discipline issue. But a child who'd survived tragedy and found a family that loved her fiercely. I'm sorry, Michelle said again, this time to Gabriella directly. I'm so sorry. Gabriella nodded. I believe you are. Now. She turned to leave, still holding her father's hand. At the warehouse door, she paused, looked back. Mrs. Harper, one more thing. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. Then she was gone. Chun followed. The three men melted into shadows. And Michelle sat alone under that single light, crying not from fear but from the weight of understanding what she'd done and who she'd done it to. She'd violated a child who'd already survived the unimaginable. Who'd already learned not to trust adults. Who'd already lost everything once. And somehow, impossibly, that child had chosen to forgive her anyway. 6 weeks later, Michelle Harper sat in a small coffee shop 3 towns over, somewhere nobody knew her face. The termination hearing had been swift. Her teaching license revoked. 3 lawsuits pending from families she'd targeted over the years. Her marriage barely surviving the stress. But she was alive. Free. Not in jail, not in a hospital, not worse. The settlement with Gabriella's family had been expensive but fair. Financial compensation, a written apology, agreement never to work in education again. Greg's parents had helped with the money. Michelle's pride had taken the final blow. She worked now as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic. Minimum wage. No authority. No classroom. Just answering phones and filing paperwork. Some days were harder than others. Days when she saw children with their parents and wondered what her life might have been if she'd made different choices. If she'd examined her biases earlier. If she'd listened instead of assumed. Her therapist said guilt was healthy in measured doses. That it meant she was actually changing, actually growing. Michelle wasn't sure. She just knew she couldn't go back to who she'd been. Meanwhile, across the city, Gabriella Kim sat in a different classroom at a different school. Her hair had grown back, rebraided by Mrs. Chun with even more care this time. Longer. More elaborate. A statement of resilience. She'd missed 2 weeks of school during the investigation, then transferred to a private academy where Chun knew the administration personally. Where teachers were carefully vetted. Where his daughter would be protected. But Gabriella had insisted on one thing. She wanted to finish the school year. Wanted to prove to herself that one bad teacher couldn't break her love of learning. "Appa," she said one evening while they ate dinner together. "I've been thinking." "About what?" Chun set down his chopsticks, gave her his full attention. "About Mrs. Harper. About what happened." Chun's expression tensed slightly. "If she's violated the agreement, if she's contacted you." "No," Gabriella interrupted. "Nothing like that. I was just thinking about why she did it. And I realized she was probably scared." Scared of what? Of change. Of people who didn't look like her or think like her. Of losing control in a world that doesn't stay the same. Chun considered this. "You're very wise for 10 years old." "I learned from the best," Gabriella smiled. They finished eating in comfortable silence. Outside, Jean Tay and Min maintained their usual perimeter security. Some things didn't change. But other things did. The school district had implemented new policies. Mandatory bias training. Independent review boards for discrimination complaints. Zero tolerance for teachers who violated student dignity. It wouldn't fix everything. Michelle Harper wasn't the only teacher who'd acted on prejudices. Riverside Elementary wasn't the only school that had looked the other way. But it was a start. Principal Davis took his severance package and retired early. Moved to Florida. Tried not to think about the careers he'd ruined by protecting the wrong people. The 12 families Jean had found received settlements from the district. Not enough to undo the harm. But enough to show their children that speaking up mattered. That justice, however delayed, was possible. And Gabriella kept her bracelet, her mother's bracelet, in a special box beside her bed. Some nights she'd take it out, hold it, remember the parents who'd loved her first. The crash that had taken them. The foster homes that had almost broken her. And then she'd remember Chun finding her. Choosing her. Fighting for her. Family, she'd learned, wasn't just blood. It was who showed up. Who protected you. Who loved you fiercely enough to burn the world down if necessary but wise enough to choose mercy when possible. Mrs. Chun visited on Sundays, bringing Korean food and doing Gabriella's hair, teaching her words in Korean, blending cultures seamlessly. Gabriella thrived. Honor roll. Dance classes. Piano lessons. A life so full and rich it sometimes felt like it belonged to someone else. But it was hers. Hard won. Protected. Cherished. One Saturday, she asked Chun if they could visit her parents' grave. They drove in silence, Jean following at a discreet distance. At the cemetery, Gabriella placed flowers, told her mom and dad about school, about Chun, about the family she'd found. They would have liked you, she told Chun afterward. They would have been grateful you found me. Chun knelt down to her level, something he rarely did anymore as she got older. I'm the grateful one, he said quietly. You taught me that strength isn't just power. It's mercy. It's forgiveness. It's choosing to be better than your worst moments. She hugged him, this man who'd saved her in every way a person could be saved. And somewhere across the city, Michelle Harper looked at herself in the mirror and tried to recognize the person staring back. She'd lost everything that defined her. Career. Reputation. Identity. But maybe, her therapist suggested, that wasn't entirely bad. Maybe losing who you were created space to become who you should have been. It would take years. Therapy. Accountability. Genuine change, not just performed regret. Michelle didn't know if she'd ever fully forgive herself. Didn't know if she deserved to. But she was trying. Actually trying. And that, at least, was a start. Before we end, make sure you're subscribed. Stories like this remind us why we do what we do. Hit that button and join our community. So what does this story teach us? On the surface, it's about a teacher who made a terrible choice and faced consequences. But dig deeper, and it's about something bigger. It's about how systems protect the powerful and fail the vulnerable. How people with authority can abuse it without even recognizing their own biases. How one moment of cruelty can ripple outward, affecting lives in ways we can't predict. But it's also about resilience. About a little girl who survived loss and found family in unexpected places. About a father who learned that the strongest protection isn't always force, but teaching your child they have worth that can't be taken by anyone's scissors. And maybe, just maybe, it's about redemption too. Not easy redemption. Not forgiveness without accountability. But the hard work of actually changing, of examining your biases, of becoming better than your worst moments. We all carry prejudices. All make assumptions. The question is whether we're willing to examine them, challenge them, and change when we're wrong. Gabriella forgave because she understood that carrying hate would only hurt her. Michelle lost everything because she never questioned her assumptions until it was too late. Chun protected his daughter but let her choose mercy, teaching her that power means nothing without wisdom. The real lesson? Your actions have consequences. How you treat people, especially those with less power, defines who you are. And sometimes the smallest act of cruelty can trigger the biggest reckonings. But even in our worst moments, change is possible. Growth is possible. If we're willing to do the actual work. That's the story. Not just about hair or schools or revenge. But about the choices we make when we have power, and who we become when we face the consequences of those choices. Thanks for watching. See you next time.